had taken a group of students to Bell County Air Historical Society. We came across this article about our local hospital and how our local hospital became desegregated. There was a coal mining disaster that happened in one of the local mines. There was an African American man who helped to save 6 or 7 coal miners, and he got them out of the mines, and they went to the hospital, and the 4 or 5 white coal miners were upstairs, and they tried to take the African American downstairs because that's where they had to go to the hospital, and the white miners were like, absolutely not, he just saved our lives. And from that point forward, there was desegregation in our hospital. There was similarities in how all of the people were treated. Everybody there were living in pretty horrible conditions in coal camps. Coal was booming in the early 1900s. When the Great Depression hit everywhere, including coal camps. What was so difficult was that in a coal camp, the coal company owned your home. So if you were laid off, not only did you not have a job, you also no longer had a home because they owned that. You owed money to the company store because the scripts that they gave you weren't enough for you to be able to pay the things that you needed. There were already some African American workers in the coal towns. Lynch is the most famous one. What's so interesting about Lynch, Kentucky is that the coal town was very much kind of integrated. There were some separate areas, but I mean, they're both working in the coal, everybody's working in the coal mines together. And so there's relationships there because you have to depend on one another. The whole dynamic of a coal town, it's fascinating in itself as to how those things work. Everybody was pretty much against the owner of the coal mines before issues of safety and unfair wages and all of those things. So there were a lot of things that brought them together. There were also some divisions there. Harlan County, the biggest booming coal town in America. One of the things, Harlan is known as Bloody Harlan, and that mainly comes from the fact that the coal miners there are the ones who fought for union rights. There's a correlation though between that event and the African American workers from the South coming to coal camps to take the place of the people who were fired or let go or who were dismissed because they were looking for unions. There were segregated schools in Pineville. Like there was an African American school just down the road from the white school, and those students, they didn't go to school together. When that school closed, those students had to ride a bus all the way to Middlesboro every day to go to school. And so we go look at some maps of the Sanborn map, and there's this little school there that says the African American school. And that's kind of what brings that up, like, well, what does that mean? Where is that now? Well, that was where the McDonald's is now, and so they had their own school. But there's also a really interesting connection with sports because one of the things that happened is the coal company had their own schools. At Lynch, they had a school, and those African American boys played basketball on a team, and the only people that they could play were other local teams. So there are all kinds of news articles and all kinds of really interesting things about how they dominated everybody in the area. And so I always show there's an image of a newspaper that has the score of the Lynch school against Pineville, and they just destroyed them. I mean, it was like, not even close. And I'm like, what is this Lynch school about? Like, who are they? That was pretty unusual at that time period. Then there was another boom, specifically World War II. There's a boom in coal. African Americans started to leave that after the boom, after World War II. Then we see African Americans go ahead and move north into factory work because there's a great migration there of them to Ohio, Indiana, some of those places where the factory work was much better. And part of that came from the treatment that they received in the coal camps because even though it was a coal camp, they still faced the same issues of discrimination, and they were on the lowest ladder. So when people were laid off, they were going to be the first ones to go. And so that led a lot also to their earlier migration, whereas the white workers, because they weren't laid off until later years, they didn't do that as much. After the 50s, it slows down a little bit in the 60s. There's another boom in the 70s, 80s, and then in the 90s, it pretty much stops and starts to decline, and since then it's been on a downward decline. Even though the coal industry is pretty much dead in Appalachia, it's still ingrained into our psyche, I guess. Like, oh yeah, my neighbor or my uncle or my cousin was a coal miner. And so how did Pineville even exist as a city? Well, it was because of the coal industry. It is very regionally appropriate for me, but I think it's something that anybody in Kentucky could study as well, because there are all kinds of those ideas. The same ideas apply, even though there may not be an industry that was specific, or they don't have coal mining specifically. You can look at that as a microcosm of what was going on in society.